Hello viewers and welcome to another commentated match of Warhammer 40,000 Conquest. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm honored to present you with another one of scarcely few matches that I myself have personally participated in. This is going to be my Week 2 match for War Master Sam Mann's Black Crusade, his online Conquest LCG competitive league. In this video, I'm once again going to be playing as our third most recent to be released Astra Militarum faction Warlord Broderick Worr, and my opponent in this video is going to be card game DB user legionthree, instead playing as our original Space Marine faction Warlord Captain Cato Sicarius. Both of us are currently in the process of deciding whether or not we want to keep our opening hands. My opponent actually decides to take a mulligan pretty quickly, and just in kind of assessing what I potentially have to work with, whether or not I want to ditch my opening 7 cards here, I was really kind of conflicted at this point. The forward barracks, my signature support, is incredibly powerful, but just in assessing the remainder of my hand, I don't really have a lot of command-savvy units, and that's really what I was hoping for. Speaking quite candidly, I was kind of filled with dread and just fear when I saw that I was going to be playing against Cato, just because he generates a ton of resources, and Space Marine units are generally incredibly durable, incredibly high damage output. Broderick kind of crumples when he ends up getting bloodied, so I was a little bit concerned about Drop Pod Assault and Crushing Blow, but for the most part, I was just really concerned about those powerful 3-drops. In deciding whether or not I want to keep my just opening layout of cards here, granted I do have that signature support, but apart from Tallarn Raiders, each of my economy, command icon possessing units happens to cost a total of 3 resources. It's nice in a sense that my opponent is playing first, because Captain Marcus, for instance, one of the 1-copy cards in this deck, he has 2 command icons, so I could maybe hold on to him until later when my opponent plays like a Void Pirate or Rogue Trader, so that I can use my 2 command icons to trump his 1. But something that ultimately guided my decision-making process was just kind of assessing our opening lineup of planets here. So if you take a quick look at planets 1 through 5, you definitely see a dearth of card bonuses. Planet number 1 has a 1 bonus, planet number 5 has a 1 bonus, and apart from that, there's not really any card offerings just in regard to the planetary layout. So clearly, Cato does the resource generation game really well, and what I was kind of starting to formulate in my mind, in my fledgling player mind here, is that if by some means I can potentially cut off Cato from drawing a bunch of cards, it doesn't really matter how many resources he ends up pulling in if I can slowly but surely create a big, powerful economy disparity. Something that also kind of contributed to my sense of anxiety and foreboding starting this match was just the general lack of green strongpoint icons present on the board, and definitely this first deploy action did not help. So my opponent put a copy of his signature support, Cato's Stronghold, into play. As soon as one of his Space Marine units kills off one of my units, and it's looking as though I were to have scarcely few of those because I did decide to keep this hand, he'd be able to ready his unit to attack again. And considering I won't be able to put much out onto the table at first, Cato could potentially kill something like my Tallarn Raiders, then he could ready, then he could potentially kill something else. And even with my forward barracks, if I can't suddenly guarantee that my opponent is only going to be able to kill 1 unit per round, I can't exactly just stall out on a planet until I can just bring enough firepower to bear to eventually push away Cato. So I end up using my first deploy action to put a copy of the Steel Legion Chimera positioned at planet number 2, and this, especially the start of this match, I was feeling very uncertain of myself, so please let me know in the comments how you would have run things differently if you would not have kept this opening hand, just because I was kind of thinking in my mind that this is going to be a much longer game. If I can try to choke Cato in regard to cards, then I might end up being able to pull this one out, but in regard to just a victory condition, I wasn't exactly sure what to go for. I was just kind of hoping that if I orient myself toward playing a longer game, then hopefully some kind of desirable victory condition will show itself, and if I stall out long enough, I'll be able to create a big economy discrepancy between my opponent and I. So the second deploy action for Cato here was kind of frustrating in a sense to me, but it wasn't that big of a deal. He put a copy of his signature army unit, the Sicarius, is chosen at planet number 3. He dealt 1 point of damage to my Steel Legion Chimera, and all of a sudden I'm not going to be able to win command at that green planet. I figured I could put the Steel Legion Chimera on planet number 2. I'd be able to win some resources for myself, and knowing that I was going to put the forward barracks into play, I figured that the Steel Legion Chimera itself is kind of a damage sponge, and with or without suppressive fire, which I did not decide to use as shields, I'd be able to stall at least long enough to start getting that forward barracks engine up and running. So at this point, I'm considering Theron is planet number 4, Carnath is planet number 5. I'm thinking I want to send Broderick Worr to planet number 5 because that has a card bonus associated with it, and I wanted to send my Tallarn Raiders. I ended up deploying them to planet number 4. I figured it would be awesome if I could win the resources. Note, much to my surprise, Captain Cato Sicarius ended up passing very early indeed, and things are actually looking okay for me here, so I wanted to put the Tallarn Raiders out to planet number 4 so that I could win some resources. If Cato showed up, I figured I could throw out the Emperor's Warrant to basically prevent him from killing my Tallarn Raiders. We'd come to the end of a combat round, I'd be able to do that Guardsman token generation thing, and even though it would mean a large number of resources for Cato, I could potentially deal out quite a bit of damage to that Warlord. The only problem there is I'd have to use some sort of combination of Emperor's Warrant and or suppressive fire just to make sure that I am able to overcome that Cato's stronghold there. Something that actually worked out really favorably for me, I think, is that I basically was hoping that Cato would show up at planet number 1. I didn't have any inclination to try to defend that planet, so Cato won that planet, and I've kind of approached this with the mindset that I'm not feeling very comfortable about my gameplay, about what my opening hand was, so I'm just going to keep stalling, keep delaying, until conditions are looking a little bit better. So Aatrox Prime is 1 green, 1 red, material and technology icon. For Cato, I don't really care that he wins that because he pulled my Steel Legion Chimera from planet 2 to planet number 3. Aatrox Prime doesn't have any targets at planet number 2. I knew that I'd be sending Broderick far away, so I need not worry about there being, any sort of units in my HQ to take a point of damage. Unfortunately, this is one of scarcely few matches I played where my opponent wasn't actually on Skype with me. For this interaction here, I ended up winning a battle at Carnath. I wanted to make sure that Broderick picked up that card, picked up that additional resource, and I kind of resigned myself to knowing that Cato would win at least 1 card from Aatrox Prime there. I wanted to get his Sicarius' Chosen evicted from planet number 2, just because green planets are pretty integral to a standard Broderick Worr victory condition, and especially considering that he's invested not just 3 resources, but also a promotion into that unit. Considering it's got 3 command icons, I figured that having a unit stuck in his HQ would restrict him a little bit, and in any case, I think activating Theron worked out a little bit better than activating Ossus 4, just because resources weren't so much an issue for me, just because during the command phase there, I think I ended up pulling in something along the lines of like 4 resources in a card, relative to, I believe, Cato walked away with 3 resources and a card, or I think just 2 resources and 1 card. So his economy showing wasn't spectacular. It's now my initiative. I had 8 resources and 6 cards relative to Cato's 8 resources and 7 cards. And now at the present moment, I'm just trying to figure out what exactly can I do. I've got a reasonable economic presence, but now how can I kind of keep denying cards of Captain Cato Sicarius? So our current planet number 1 is a green planet. It could allow me to steal 1 resource, But I'm thinking that unless the opportunity really presents itself, that's not the highest priority planet for me. I've kind of resigned myself at this point to just kind of block off my opponent's victory condition, and until that point I'll just try to play the economy game, kind of distribute my units as kind of evenly as possible, slowly but surely, just to try to set planets up so that anywhere that Cato goes, I can at least offer some sort of competition to him. Our HQ phase has by this point come and go. Our new 5th planet is going to be Planum, which allows you to move a non-Warlord unit. I went ahead and put a Sanctioned Psyker at that planet. Thanks to Broderick Worr's ability, it happens to be a 1/4, since Planum has one of those green strongpoint icons. And my thought process behind wanting to put that durable unit at that planet, apart from, well, instead of something like Captain Marcus, is that if Cato were to show up with the Sicarius as chosen, Cato could take a swing, even augmented by that Catachan outpost that he just put into play. I'd be able to stomach that blow thanks to Emperor's Warrant, and then I could generate a Guardsman token, which would be a 2/2, and then I could start dealing out a considerable bit of damage to my opponent. I came across a copy of Inquisitorial Fortress during my HQ, and I feel as though this is a fantastic opportunity to put this into play just as a bit of insurance. So it's 2 cost, but it allows me to route even a unique unit, and I just figured that if that Sicarius is chosen at any point becomes a little bit of a problem, I could use the Inquisitorial Fortress to kick a unit away from that planet, and I kind of played that in my mind, knowing that if at all possible, I'd want to wait until after the Catachan outpost was activated in order to use that effect. And it was also a fantastic bit of insurance against card effects like Drop Pod Assault or Eager Recruit just being surprisingly dropped into play and causing a lot of problems for me. But at this point, it looks as though my opponent has actually passed, and I do have to apologize to you viewers. I'm a very slow player indeed, and by no means did I feel confident going into this match, but I was just trying to think in my mind, what exactly should I put where? I'm thinking I want to send Broderick Worr to Karnath, but I'm trying to anticipate in my mind where exactly is Captain Cato Sicarius going to be sent? Where would be favorable for him to show up? Definitely, since he's already got 1 green and 1 blue icon, a green planet like Ossus 4 isn't tremendously appealing to him, and even though he'd be able to steal resources, it's really not that big of a deal for Cato just because he's got that built-in really strong economy ability. So I'm kind of trying to weigh my options here. I'm strongly considering putting out Captain Marcus to planet number 1, just because he costs 3 plus a card. If I send him to planet number 1, I'll be able to immediately recoup his cost, and I figured that once again, if Cato shows up at planet number 1, I could have, Catachan Outpost brings him to attack value of 4, I could dump a shield card, keep Captain Marcus alive, I'd be able to generate a Guardsman token that would be a 2/2. If there's some sort of nasty surprise, I could use the Inquisitorial Fortress, and at this point I would imagine it's abundantly clear to my opponent that once again I'm going to be able to, I'm going to choose to send my Warlord to Karnath, and this is actually a very interesting round, and let me know in the comments if you'd have done things differently, how you think this round is going to unfold. My opponent announces, well, this could get ugly fast, and indeed it kind of does. So my initial reaction here was that I want to go to planet number 1, but I do ultimately rethink this prospect. I was thinking I could show up and definitely win at planet number 1, I could maybe definitely win at planet number 2, and then I could just keep playing until eventually we get to Planum, and then I could try to win through that planet. But in assessing my opponent's victory condition, I can clearly see that his victory planet is going to be our current planet number 3. So instead of going for number 1, I end up resigning myself, kind of relegating myself to sending Broderick to planet number 4. I figured that at the very worst, if Cato also went to planet number 4, we would break even at that planet. So if I don't draw a card, at the very least, Cato isn't going to be able to draw a card either. And if you look at the way I've kind of strung out my units here, I've definitely got command icons all over. Cato does indeed go to planet planet number 4. I also show up to planet number 4. He's got the Sicarius is chosen, but if there's some sort of emergency, I can use my Inquisitorial Fortress to remove units from the planet, and I have started the game with a copy of Elysian Assault Team in my hand, so even if at some point it seems like I'm going to be losing all of my units, I can still use that Elysian Assault Team to replace one of those Soldier Trait Guardsman tokens. What definitely did suck about going to planet number 4 is that it's not a green planet, so any and all tokens I generate are going to only be 1/2s, and the reason I asked people to leave a comment in regard to do you agree with whether or not that was the right move is just specifically because I wasn't sure if I was opening myself up to a fantastic opportunity for Cato to just generate a tremendous number of resources here, but just in regard to economy, I got 1 card, 6 resources, which was incredible, and because my opponent and I broke even, he actually didn't end up winning anything in regard to that command phase, and planet number 1, Captain Marcus was able to win that quite handily by himself, and his ability, a combat action to discard and, well, sacrifice an Astra Militarum faction unit to exhaust an enemy unit, it doesn't require Captain Marcus to exhaust or to be ready, so I was very comfortable with kind of throwing him out to planet number 1. So, you know, I think this is still the second time I've ever played Broderick Worr, just my second match here in the league, so I'm not sure if this was a good play or not. But I've got the initiative token, and I'm trying to think to myself, do I want to retreat, or do I want to stay at this planet? Do I want to try to kill off that Sicarius is chosen? Do I want to take advantage of this opportunity? What I was very concerned about is my opponent with 5 resources. He could have 2 drop pod assaults and a crushing blow, and an eager recruit. Crushing blow could also have kind of come into that equation there, but I've got 2 shield value cards in my hand. So even though my initial instinct is to retreat, because I'm only going to be able to generate 1/2 guardsman tokens at the end of each combat round thanks to my signature support, I wanted to try to deal out as much damage as possible. And I knew that by giving up this planet, I'd basically be giving my opponent the opportunity to use Karnath to trigger Farron and to pick and choose one of my units to rout, but I wasn't too terribly concerned about having one of those kicked back to my HQ, so I figured that by staying at this planet, I could kind of drain my opponent's available resources in the form of cards. Again, I'm not too terribly concerned about Cato's actual resource number, just so long as I can get him to burn a lot of shields, burn a lot of events. No matter what damage I can do to his hand, I figured that things would be looking pretty good, just because still, currently, we only have 2 1-card bonus cards out on the table here. Interesting to me, I went ahead and took a swing at his Sicarius is chosen. I didn't think it'd be very valuable to try to deal out any damage to the, relatively durable Captain Cato Sicarius. I took a swing for 2. He threw away a copy of his signature event, the Fury of Sicarius, so his signature unit only took 1 point of damage. Cato himself just took a swing of 2. He did not use the Catachan outpost, which made me think that this might be a fantastic opportunity for me to be able to rout one of his units should he use a drop pod assault, and I did not choose to shield against this initial couple points of damage, just because I know pretty well what to expect from a Space Marine faction opponent. Like, the worst case scenario would have been a White Scars Biker or Honored Librarian being drop pod assaulted in, then being augmented by a Catachan outpost for 6, and then swinging at me. And if that were to happen, I could have used the Inquisitorial Fortress to rout that unit. If it was just an Honored Librarian attacking for 4, I could have used the Preemptive Barrage to mitigate that damage down, and unless my opponent had, multiple copies of Crushing Blow, I wasn't too tremendously concerned. So we come to the end of a combat round. I decide to stay, be a little bit ballsy. Again, my opponent is slowly but surely starting to use some of his cards. I take another swing with Broderick Worr, and this is kind of the shitty part about not being on Skype, is I took that swing with Broderick Worr. My opponent discarded his Iron Halo, so 2-2 is going to be no points of damage. I use Suppressive Fire to exhaust my Guardsman token to tap out his copy of Sicarius is chosen there, just just because I basically used the action of that guardsman token, which only would have been swinging for 1. It wouldn't have been threatening to kill off a unit, and I went ahead and used that effect just because it's basically preventing 2 points of damage instead of 1, and since I'm not threatening to deal a lethal amount of damage, I couldn't care less about that guardsman token's action. So again, I'm trying to think to myself, I guess I'll use the Emperor's Warrant at this point. I accidentally played it, so I had to recoup 2 resources to myself. So I threw that away. I once again blocked Captain Cato Sicarius' attack entirely, and at this point I'm starting to think that something is really suspicious because, again, note, my opponent has not exhausted his Catachan outpost. So definitely not to my surprise, my opponent throws out that drop pod assault. He's going to take a look at the top 6 cards of his deck, search for any Space Marine faction unit he would like, and then he's going to be able to take a swing at my Warlord. So Broderick Worr has 4 hit points remaining, and my opponent ends up finding a copy of Blood Angels Veterans. So at this point, I'm trying to think to myself, my hand is basically forced. He's only got 3 cards at this point. He uses that Blood Angels Veterans. He takes a swing at me. I was thinking that he would probably use the Catachan Outpost to swing for 5. If that's the case, if he had a copy of Crushing Blow, I'd be essentially doomed. But very interesting to me, my opponent does not use his Catachan Outpost again, and therefore Broderick is facing a swing of 3. And this was a really difficult decision for me. I was trying to think, do I want to risk, saving this event or not? Potentially my Warlord would be sitting at 1 hit point outside of Crushing Blow, but I decided to play it safe, just throw away my event. Because if you look at the board here, all of my opponent's units are concentrated on 1 planet, and if I can try to make it as unfriendly as possible for Cato to be sent to any planet, then things will be looking up for me, and especially considering I've got that forward barracks to kind of fall back on, I am feeling relatively secure that I'll be able to block Cato from being able to take any planet. So I run Broderick Worr away from combat. We come to the end of a combat round here. I choose not to trigger the reaction associated with forward barracks because I do not want Captain Cato Sicarius to gain an additional resource, but it's going to be my attack. At the beginning of this combat round, I ran Broderick Worr away, and I'm very pleased to see that at this point, my opponent does throw away a copy of Crushing Blow, so I guess I was very right to have played a little bit conservatively there, or I guess you could just call it playing intelligently. So I'm not sure if it was a mistake or not for the opponent to use his copy of Crushing Blow at this point, just to spare that Sicarius has chosen 1 point of damage kind of needlessly. He uses Karnath to rout my Steel Legion Chimera that had been positioned at planet number 1. Again, it's not the most valuable planet in the world. My opponent can safely take that planet, and he won't be able to win the game. So I don't really care that much that Steel Legion Chimera is going to be routed, especially considering it's another unit where if it shows up to combat exhausted, I'm still going to be able to benefit from its ability. Just like Captain Marcus, I don't feel it's any big loss to have that one leave. So, we come to a new HQ phase. Both of us generate 4 resources. Each of us come across 2 additional cards. And here's where I'm starting to see that economic discrepancy pay off. My opponent puts a Blood Angels Veterans at planet number 1, but now he's only got 3 cards remaining in hand. And I think to myself, I don't really give a shit that Yvonne is, allows both players the opportunity to put an army unit from their hand into play. It's a 3-icon planet, but so long as I can prevent my opponent from winning at Farron, I don't really care if he takes that planet, so I'm going to kind of decide to distribute my forces evenly throughout the battlefield here. Once again, same rationale as before. I put Planum and Barlas. I've got a Sanctioned Psyker at both of those. They're green planets. That means the Sanctioned Psyker is going to be attacking as a 1/4. Cato himself, thanks to my summary execution, which I could use as a shield, is not going to be able to kill off one of those units in a single swing. I can use forward barracks to generate a guardsman token, I can use the Elysian Assault Team, and I can slowly but surely apply enough pressure in my mind, I think, to kind of force Cato away from that planet. Critically important to keep in mind is that our new 5th planet is going to be Barless, and that is a 2-card bonus planet. So I'm thinking in my mind, I definitely want to block off my opponent's hypothetical victory condition at planet number 2, but for the moment, I don't need to worry about it too much. I'm thinking that even though I've got a fair few units in my HQ, I want Broderick to show up at planet number 5 just because I cannot afford to have my Space Marine opponent draw a bunch of cards to go along with his resources, just because the 3-cost Space Marine cards are so incredibly powerful. So I'm thinking in my mind, I probably want to send Broderick to planet number 5. I sent that Sanctioned Psyker there just to serve as an additional body to guarantee that I'll be able to win that planet. Again, I was thinking about planet number 1, and I think I previously misspoke where I felt very conflicted. This was kind of a turning point for me. I figured that I'd be able to try to win if I've already got a green strongpoint planet. I can just think in my mind, okay, I want to be able to try to win at green planets. Like if I've got one icon, if I win at planet number 1 but end up taking considerable losses thanks to the Cato stronghold, thanks to that Catachan outpost, that's just kind of unacceptable. I could use the Inquisitorial Fortress thing, but I kind of, clear my mind, calm myself, and think, it's not that big of a deal, Mitch. Let's just play a long game. Let's take a little bit of a risk. So again, let me know in the comments if you feel as though this was a wise move or not. I'm thinking let's show up to... I guess I picked planet number 3 was my ultimate destination. So I sent Broderick Worr to that planet knowing that I've got some opposition to fight against. But I've got that Elysian Assault Team. I've got the Inquisitorial Fortress to kick one of those units away from that planet. I was thinking that Captain Cato Sicarius might show up to planet number 1 just to assist that Blood Angels veterans. And I do have to apologize. I guess in hindsight, I'm kind of struggling to recollect what my exact strategic thought was. But here I'm just wanting to try to shore up, block off as many cards as humanly possible. So planet number 5, that Sanctioned Psyker is going to be able to get 2 cards by itself, even though I'm not going to be able to trigger a battle ability at that planet and end up doing the random card discard thing. Because I sent Broderick Worr to planet number 3, all that my opponent ended up getting for economy was a single resource token at planet number 1, and at this point I'm thinking that if I can play a strong enough economy game, even if Broderick Worr ends up being bloodied, it's not going to be the end of the world, and thanks to just distributing my units all throughout these different planets, and especially paying attention to Barless and Karnath and Planum, blocking off my opponent's promoted Sicarius' Chosen, I was able to draw a total of 5 cards and 4 resources relative to my opponent's lone resource here. The problem is that I've got a couple of units that I'm staring down, but at this point I've got 12 resources and 7 cards. My opponent has 6 resources and 2 cards, and something I was kind of banking on is being able to draw some sort of, shield cards or combat tricks like Preemptive Barrage or anything along those lines. I did have that Elysian Assault Team, I had the Forward Barracks, I had my Inquisitorial Fortress Insurance, but I was fortunate enough to draw a copy of the Emperor's Warrant, and I'm using that to its full effect now. So at planet number 3, the enemy Warlord is not present, so my opponent kind of did this backward, which we kind of have to work our way through. But again, kind of the pitfalls of not using Skype. Voice chat wasn't available, I guess, while legionthree was traveling. So the Emperor's Warrant exhausts the Blood Angels veterans. That means they're no longer going to be able to trigger their reaction to shave off damage. And that's going to afford me the opportunity for the BAV to deal out 3 points of damage to that Sicarius' Chosen. And then Broderick Worr himself is going to be able to swing for 2, damage the Blood Angels veterans, veterans, then we'll come to the end of a combat round, and then I'll be able to use my forward barracks. Something that definitely took me by surprise here, and this is a little bit of an unfortunate misplay on behalf of my opponent, I figured he might have a 2-shield card in hand or something along those lines, but if you notice, my opponent doesn't have... well, he only has 1 card left in hand, so when the Sicarius' Chosen dies, he throws out an Elysian Assault Team, and I use this opportunity to take a swing with Broderick Worr and kill the Elysian Assault Team, because as I've got a Warlord at that planet, it's my opportunity to attack first, and I kill off his lingering unit. I indicate that I'm done. I don't have any additional actions, and to my opponent's lament, he calls out, misplays everywhere. That certainly was an unfortunate mistake on his part, but we come to the end of a combat round here. I do use this opportunity to generate a guardsman token at this planet, and we're going to come to the end of a combat round here just to be, a gentleman, I guess, to make sure I dot my I's and cross my T's. I eventually, in just a moment, write out, I assume that you're staying for my opponent. It's going to be my opportunity to attack first. I was trying to think, do I want to use Captain Marcus to exhaust his units? Like, I could use Captain Marcus, sacrifice my Guardsman token, and then exhaust his Blood Angels veterans. But what I was considering doing is waiting to use that effect until after I attack, just to see if he would maybe use the Catachan outpost. I was kind of trying to figure out what I want to do, but for the time being, as I'm still thinking, I'm offering to my opponent, like I type out right here, I say your guy might as well just stay at the planet, because if he retreats, he'll basically just self-destruct. But I guess my opponent just decided that there was absolutely nothing that he'll be able to do. He says he's not going to be able to do any good with his Blood Angels veterans, so he retreats it from the planet, and thanks to Broderick Worr's ability, it's going to end up just being automatically destroyed, so he discards the Blood Angels veterans. Bit of a curious play. I imagine if it would have stayed, I'd have used my Guardsman token to be sacrificed to exhaust it, then I'd have killed it with my units, and I was trying to think in my mind if there was any way that I could potentially come to the end of a combat turn, like if I could have had Broderick retreat, attacked with both of my units. Was there some way that I could have preserved the life? Basically, is there a way that I could have come to the end of a combat round with all of my units exhausted so that I could have generated an additional Guardsman token? And had he stayed exhausted, I'd have retreated with Broderick Worr, attacked with my remaining units. That would have been enough damage to kill the Blood Angels veterans, and that would have been an additional Guardsman token sitting at that planet. So it really didn't end up making any difference in regard to whether or not my opponent just threw away his Blood Angels veterans or not. Karnath, I end up winning the battle at that planet. I choose to trigger Barlas's battle ability. That's going to be a random card discard from my opponent's hand. He ended up discarding a copy of Crushing Blow randomly. We now come across an HQ phase, 4 resources and 2 cards for both players, and this is where I was really starting to feel as though by being a little bit patient, by kind of just calming myself down, by taking a little bit of additional time, things have really started to pay off for me. But the problem now is that even though things are looking really good economically, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I definitely need to block off my opponent at planet number 1, but if he decides to send some of his units elsewhere, how can I try to make sure that I continue starving him of cards? Because I've got 14 resources and 8 cards, but my opponent does still have 10 resources and 2 cards, and a couple of things like, Honored Librarian, and a third final copy of Blood Angels veterans, White Scars Bikers. Those could all pose significant problems for me. So I'm trying to think, how can I distribute these units to try to block off my opponent? I'm thinking, okay, I'm definitely going to be able to play more cards than my opponent can. He'll have to pass first. So I put a copy of Anxious Infantry Platoon at our current planet number 4, and I'm thinking that if Cato shows up at that planet, I'll definitely be able to deal out a large amount of damage with that unit. Inquisitorial Fortress can remove whatever problematic enemy unit happens to arrive, and then I'll be able to guarantee with those 2 2 units that I can get my forward barracks up and running so that even if my opponent, draws a couple cards, winning the card bonus associated with that planet, I'll nevertheless be able to do that random card discard. My opponent puts a copy of Rattling Deadeye at planet number 3, and I end up putting a Rattling Deadeye at planet number 1. My thought here was I could maybe send Broderick Worr to planet number 1. I could attack with the Rattling Deadeye, then I could use Summary Execution to turn that into a green planet. Then I could use that forward barracks engine to basically prevent Cato from winning at that planet. But for the moment, I'm just trying to lock down all of these card bonuses and just make each and every planet as unappealing as is possible for Cato. Planet number 2 I'm feeling very good about because Marcus is going to be able to exhaust units. That Steel Legion Chimera basically acts as a bullet magnet, or if you decide to attack other units, then instead it prevents points of damage being dealt out to those. At planet number 1, I put a copy of the Anxious Infantry Platoon. In my mind, I wasn't quite sure whether or not I wanted to send Broderick to that planet. I figure that I've got so many resources, I could keep the Anxious Infantry at that planet if I need to, and not experience too much economic strain as the result of doing so. And then if it becomes a green planet, then things are looking all the better. But again, I'm just trying to think, where might Cato go? Where exactly do I want to place some of these units? I will confess, something I was not thinking about at this point was Exterminatus. It had completely kind of just not crossed my mind, but all the same, I'm still feeling fairly confident about where I'm putting all of these units, just because even though I'm putting a lot into play, again, I'm going to be able to have a pretty strong command showing. And in regard to where I send my units, I think I decide to send Broderick. I'm trying to think of my victory conditions. So at the present moment, all I have is one green icon. I think I send Broderick to planet 4 just so I can do that forced discard of one card, just because I definitely do not want to relent. I do not want to give up. And possibly a pitfall of mine is I'm a little bit overconfident in regard to the first planet here. Like, it doesn't really cross my mind at this point to say maybe I should send Broderick to the first planet, do that summary execution trick, and I kind of take a little bit of a gamble just in sending Broderick to planet number 4. So I'm thinking I want to play as long a game as is possible. I definitely want to do that random card discard. So the conservative thing would have been planet number 1, I think, but if Cato showed up at planet number 4, I wanted to block off those 2 cards just by any means possible. So planet number 1, Cato is going to win. That's going to be 2 resources for him, but I'm going to win at each and every other additional planet, and thanks to my Void Pirate, that's going to be an additional card that I'm pulling in. So once again, I'm just creating all the more of an economic disparity between my opponent and I. Once again, I pull in 5 cards and 2 resources, and it just seems as though for this deck in particular, it is so critically important that I keep drawing cards as opposed to getting resources, just because all of my units are so inexpensive, and then they benefit from Broderick's, +1 attack value. And again, all credit for creating this deck goes to Travis McDaniel, who's a far more practiced player than I, and a far more seasoned deck builder. But Cato has shown up at planet number 1, and I'm trying to think what exactly I want to use in regard to just stuff sitting at the first planet to try to counter him. I've got a ranged skirmish unit. Unfortunately, I don't have a Catachan outpost in play, so my Rattling Deadeye is only going to be able to threaten a single point of damage, but it definitely beats nothing, knowing full well that I'll be able to exhaust and remove the Blood Angels veterans from this planet thanks to that Inquisitorial Fortress. I opt to choose Captain Cato Sicarius as my target, and again, kind of the crappy thing about not using Skype is my opponent kind of jumps the gun here by using that combat action to use Catachan Outpost on Captain Cato Sicarius but because I don't want any of my units killed off by that unit, potentially, just to have him use Cato's Stronghold, and because I want to try to win this planet by any means necessary, especially knowing full well that my opponent only has one card in hand, I throw down a suboptimal preemptive barrage, give my two existing units the ranged keyword, and therefore, after my Rattling Deadeye, they're able to use their own attacks. So it sucks that this isn't a green strongpoint planet. This may have been an opportunity to bloody Captain Cato Sicarius had it been, but Tallarn Raiders is going to be 2 points of damage dealt out to Cato, which he takes, and now the Anxious Infantry platoon itself swings for 3, and now things get incredibly interesting because I have 2 copies of the Elysian Assault Team in my hand, and Cato uses his last card as a shield. He throws away Primal Howl, and that was another kind of added bit of incentive to try to avoid being commit to the same planet as the enemy Warlord, the possibility of that contingency there, because it would suck if he were to draw 3 cards. But Primal Howl is gone. Cato's still got 2 hit points. He takes a swing at the Tallarn Raiders. I believe the Catachan Outpost was in... I wasn't exactly sure if this was in effect or not, because my opponent didn't, ask to take it back. I think if he would have requested to, I'd have allowed him to, but I just let the Tallarn Raiders die, and I used this opportunity. I let them die specifically so I could put an Elysian Assault Team into play. Otherwise, I would have thrown away a Summary Execution, or I'd have thrown away Promotion, just to make sure that they are not killed. Captain Cato Sicarius, I suppose, readies himself thanks to Cato's Stronghold, but I've got this Elysian Assault Team in play. It's my opportunity to attack, and at that point, that's going to be an attack of 2, even though it's not a green planet going out. Cato is going to be outright bloodied, so at this point, Cato's got 12 resources, but his ability is shut off. He doesn't have any cards at hand. We come to the end of a combat round. I generate a Guardsman token, and now both of our players are going to have the opportunity to retreat, and my opponent decides to run his Blood Angels veterans away from that planet, and then I decide that my Anxious Infantry platoon, I'm going to let it retreat, as opposed to forcing myself to pay that 1 resource to keep it at that planet, because Farron, our current first planet, is going to be, captured in just a moment. So I use Farron, I rout my opponent's Rattling Deadeye, which is great, because he's got that Catachan Outpost, potentially allowing him to attack for 3 during ranged, and now I've got a green strongpoint icon, I've got a red material type icon, and I'm thinking that my victory condition is probably going to be Barless, provided that I can win at Planum. And at this point, even though I've just got that 1 Rattling Deadeye, I was thinking I could maybe come across another copy of Preemptive Barrage and assassinate my opponent, but it looks as though I was not quite so fortunate as we move beyond a new HQ phase here. Broderick did end up winning that battle at Barless entirely uncontested, but my opponent did not have any cards remaining in hand for me to randomly discard. But we move past our HQ phase. We're in our next deploy phase here. Karnath is planet number 1. Again, we only have 3 planets remaining on the board. And again, all of these planets are very unappealing options for the 2/5 Captain Cato Sicarius to show up to, because if he gets assassinated, he will die. He'll lose the game. And I'm just trying to think, how can I kind of distribute my units across these different planets just to ensure that Cato's not able to win the game. At planet number 1, if Cato were to win that planet, he'd pick up the red and blue material and technology type icons he would need to win the game. So I'm just thinking, okay, I want to be able to keep blocking off planet number 1, which again, frustratingly is not green. And then, what exactly can I put at these other 2 planets just to guarantee that Cato's not going to be able to do much there, that he'll basically be forced to retreat, and then I'll be able to kill off whatever units he has remaining. And again, I'm kind of banking on the Inquisitorial Fortress. I've called it insurance a million different times. At this point, legionthree says, I don't really see a way out of this, but I suppose we can play it out, see if anything crazy happens. And I wasn't exactly sure how to phrase... I don't want to say, if you just want to give up, feel free to, ha ha ha. So I ultimately decide to say it's up to you whether or not we want to play it out. I feel that's kind of a nice way of putting this, because it looks as though definitely it's going to be an uphill battle for Cato to try to pull this one out. But my opponent decides to keep going, so he's already passed. He hasn't played either of his cards, so I'm definitely concerned about drop pod assaults. I'm concerned about eager recruits and crushing blows. I definitely don't want my Warlord to get assassinated, but I've got a 2-shield icon card in my hand. I've got a couple of 1-shield icon cards. At planet number 1, I know that if I need to, I could send Broderick there. I could use my summary execution, but I'm thinking, again, how could this possibly go wrong? The answer is going to be if my opponent's able to win a lot of cards and then stack a ton of units on one planet, like if for some reason he can end up winning at not planet number 1, but perhaps next turn at planet number 2, then that could be my downfall. So again, just kind of distributing my combat units evenly throughout the field here as I put an Iron Guard recruits at planet number 1. My putting a Steel Legion Chimera at planet number 2 basically convinced me that there is no way in hell that Cato's going to be showing up at that planet. That's a 3-4 that takes priority target. Both of Cato's kind of, accompanying units are going to be showing up exhausted. I've still got my fortress. Broderick Worr himself is going to be showing up with 3 army units and a guardsman token. So I'm thinking, what do I want to do? I want to keep on blocking off my opponent's cards. I want to send War to Barlas, just because if I can do a random card discard, that's going to be fantastic. Why let my opponent have an inch if I can prevent him from getting any ground whatsoever? So looks like I need not have worried about planet number 1. Planet number 3, I'm going to be able to win command there as well, so I'm going to win command on all 3 different planets. Once again, my Void Pirate is definitely paying for itself and then some, and not just that command icon, but also that card bonus that's, I believe, being activated for the 3rd, at least, time now. I verify with my opponent that we're indeed done, and that's going to be another 5 cards and 2 resources drawn, and at this point, my opponent has not drawn anything or generated a single resource. So Karnath, we're going to have a battle taking place here. My opponent has 16 resources and 2 cards relative to my 10 cards and 4 resources. For a half of a second, I thought about using Planum to relocate my Steel Legion Chimera from planet 2 to planet number 3 or something silly like that, but I decide that's a very stupid idea, and I resigned myself to use Karnath to trigger Barlas, and that's going to be a random card discarded. And that random card discarded is going to be a copy of Indomitable, which is absolutely fantastic to see my opponent get rid of that. So Barlas is taking place. My opponent has the initiative. His Warlord is bloodied. Catachan Outpost is going to increase Captain Cato Sicarius to an attack value of 4. My opponent has 1 resource in hand. 4 minus 2, thanks to my timely discard of the Emperor's Warrant, is only going to be 2. But I wait with bated breath. Is my opponent going to have a copy of Crushing Blow or not? And it looks as though the answer is no. So, at this point, I'm thinking again, do I want to be conservative or not? I was thinking in my mind that Cato had 6 hit points, and I'm thinking, do I just want to retreat Broderick Worr? That way I can keep my Inquisitorial Fortress for another round. It would probably be fine for Broderick to stay at this planet, but I'm just thinking, why bother staying if it's safer to run away and I'll still be able to deal out a considerable amount of damage? But I'm thinking in my mind here, I might need Broderick to stay at this planet just because obviously it strikes me all of a sudden, hey, Captain Cato Sicarius is exhausted. My opponent only has 1 card in hand. If he puts any unit into play thanks to Drop Pod Assault or uses an Eager Recruit or something like that, I'll be able to rout it, so why don't I take a little bit of a gamble? So I decide to kind of test the waters, have Broderick hang out at the planet for at least a little while longer. The Sanctioned Psyker takes a swing. My opponent happened to space the fact that Broderick is going to augment it up to a base attack value of 1. So the Sanctioned Psyker does manage to successfully deal out a single point to the opposition there, single point of damage, that is. My opponent, laments his small mistake there. I guess no actions on behalf of my opponent. Again, I'm still waiting for that drop pod assault for that eager recruit. I take a swing with my Iron Guard recruits. They're going to be threatening 2 points of damage dealt out to the enemy unit. And Cato, all of a sudden, is sitting, just at 3 hit points. At this point, I do decide to use my Broderick Worr, just because I'm thinking in my mind I want to try to maximize the amount of damage on Cato as is possible, even if my opponent were to end up throwing out a copy of Indomitable had my Anxious Infantry platoons ended up attacking, just because a Warlord at 1 point remaining is much better than a Warlord at 2 points of damage remaining, but of course at this point looks as though the only shield card available for my opponent was going to be a copy of Promotion. That was insufficient to overcome the amount of damage I would have been able to deal out with Broderick Worr and with the Anxious Infantry platoon there. So, once again, I think just in speaking right now, I forgot, again, a bloodied Captain Cato Sicarius has 5 hit points, not 6. Therefore, 1 point of damage from the Sanctioned Psyker, 2 from the Iron Guard recruits, another couple of points of damage from Broderick Worr himself. Whether or not we'd have had an Indomitable, it would not have made enough of a difference. That is an assassination victory, so very good game, but well played by part of legionthree. So thank you to him for affording me the opportunity to record this game. It was a very stressful match at first. Be sure to leave a comment letting me know what you think I did well, what you think I did poorly, and just what some general strategy thoughts or pointers or bits of advice or wisdom are. At this point in my Conquest career, I've played a little over 20 or so matches. I don't really consider myself a skillful player by any means, but by playing the long game, by playing a little bit smarter than I normally do, I was able to turn a potential loss into a slow but steady victory. So I very much hope you all enjoyed this match. Thank you as always for watching, and if you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, as ever, you're always encouraged to share this content, because the more engagement these videos receive, the more individuals there are that stumble upon this game, the more people may give Conquest a try. They might enjoy this living card game, they may serve to join our community, and of course, altogether we continue to send the message to Fantasy Flight Games, telling them to continue to support this fantastic product. If at any point you'd like to get in touch with me, I would encourage you to do so through Facebook or on Twitter, and if you ever feel so inclined to help support the Hive Tyrant, I would be honored and humbled were you to make a donation to my Patreon. But once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for much more Conquest LCG content to come.